I'm Frederick. They told me this in a whisper. Now, you'll hear it. Enjoy watching. Cove apartment complex, a golden pink color, as if deliberately giving the place the illusion of warmth that it never actually had. The lawns were perfectly trimmed. The flowers were planted with mathematical precision, and the paths leading to the pool and tennis courts were as sterile as an operating room. Michael left the house quietly, without slamming the door, as if instinctively not wanting to disturb the space to which he had not been able to get used in the past 2 weeks. He was wearing simple jeans, a black sweatshirt without a hood, and sneakers that were worn out by time but sturdy, almost like himself. His dog Buster, a pit bull Labrador mix with a sleek coat and intelligent, human-understanding eyes, was jumping around next to him. Michael loved Buster more than most people. He was loyal, quiet, always there. And unlike those around him, Buster never looked at him as a problem, a threat, or an intrusion. Michael walked down the pedestrian mall, his every move sending invisible ripples across the faces of those around him. Someone watched from the second-story windows, the curtains drawn when he looked up. An elderly woman in a golf hat stood frozen by a trash can, clutching a plastic bag to her chest as if it would protect her. A child playing on the playground tugged at his mother's hand and pointed at Buster, and the mother hurried him away without a word. It wasn't fear, it was calculation. That cold, quiet fear born not of threat, but of contempt. Michael knew that look. He'd seen it in stores, in schools, on buses. "You're not from here," those looks said, even when their mouths were silent. His mother had worked as a translator for the State Department, and after divorcing his father, she had settled temporarily here, in one of the best areas of town. The area was gated, expensive, and most important to the locals, safe. But safety here didn't mean the absence of crime. It meant the absence of strangers. Colored, poor, suspicious, like him. At first glance, nothing foreshadowed trouble. Warm air, the occasional sound of crickets, soft music from a distant window. But Michael felt it, that strange, viscous tension, as if someone was watching his back. He did not turn around. He did not do anything suspicious. He walked strictly along the sidewalk. Buster was on a leash. His speed was moderate. His posture was relaxed. His expression was neutral. He had been taught. His father had repeated many times, "You must be twice as quiet, twice as calm, and 3 times as careful, because you have no right to make a mistake. Not in this country. Not in this skin color." He was not a coward. He simply knew the value of movement, gesture, word. And so when, in the silence of the evening paradise, he heard the click of a radio behind him and a horse, "I am observing a suspicious person. I am approaching." He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He just squeezed the leash a little tighter. He didn't turn around. He didn't change his trajectory. He waited, not because he was ready, because he had no choice. The footsteps behind him grew louder. They walked quietly on the rubber surface, but he could hear them, like he could hear breathing behind him. He felt Buster tense up, his muzzle slightly to the side, his ears thrown back. The dog, too, could smell the other man. 2 people, one taller, one heavier. He turned only when the voice sounded almost next to him, sharp and disconcertingly confident. "Hey, you!" He stopped, turned around, calmly, without unnecessary emotion. There were 2 people standing in front of him, one in a private security uniform with a black baseball cap and a faded HOA logo on his chest. The other, a little older, with a massive chest and small cold eyes, like a predator. They did not introduce themselves. They did not apologize for their rudeness. They began with an order. "What are you doing here?" Although it was obvious that he was walking the dog, he answered politely, as he had been trained. He said he lived in 84B with his mother, that he walked his dog, that he was a resident and didn't break the rules. But they had already made up their minds, not from his words, from his face, from his skin. One of the guards looked at the dog and snorted. "Fighting breed, huh? Those aren't allowed here." Michael shook his head. "He's certified. He's been tested. We have permission." But the other one had already taken a step closer. Too close. Michael could feel the tension building, something intangible trembling in the air. the energy felt only by those who had been beaten. He wasn't afraid. He just knew that pain wasn't a matter of if, it was a matter of when. One of the guards took out his phone and began filming him, as if preparing for a scene in which he was the villain. Buster growled, not loudly, but enough to wake whatever was dormant in these men. One of them pulled out a stun gun. "Get away from the dog," he ordered. His voice was dry, almost emotionless. Michael didn't move. He did nothing. "You are exceeding your authority." But those were the wrong words. There is no authority here. There is power. And in this evening, paradise of flowers and smooth paths and expensive cars, there was no God and no conscience left, only fear turning to violence. He sees the second guard make a gesture. They start to approach. Buster bares his teeth. Someone opens a window and then slams it shut. Someone turns off the music. The world goes silent. Everything that was normal ceases to be. He feels something ancient and dark awakening in this place, as if the earth itself is saying, "You don't belong here. We won't allow you to become part of this world." He realizes there is no turning back, that a simple walk with a dog has turned into a hunt, and he is the prey. On the south side of the apartment complex, where the sidewalk met the parking lot, a white unmarked police car sat in the shade of some bushes, smelling of burnt plastic, sweat, and 2-day-old coffee. The windows were slightly open, but the interior was silent except for the clicking of a radio. There were 2 people in the car. Jerry Crawford, a former cop fired for rough conduct during an arrest, and hired here through a friend, and his partner Danny Lawson, young but already paranoid about invasion. Jerry was bored. The days in this complex were the same. Retirees, bored housewives, managers parking Teslas, and the occasional quiet interloper like teenagers on skateboards. But when he saw a boy with a dog in the lens of the camera, something stirred inside him. He couldn't explain what it was. Instinct, perhaps, or habit, or a desire for power that had been taken from him elsewhere. He zoomed in on the monitor and said dryly, "We have an intruder, black, with a dog." Danny immediately reached for the radio. He hadn't asked. There was no need to explain. It was an automatic response, trained over the years. A black teenager in an elite white neighborhood meant a possible threat. The radio crackled into the silence. Post 3, suspicious, 1 teenager, black, with a dog, moving along the lake area, coming in. They didn't turn on their beacons. They didn't go out right away. They decided to watch first, to test the reaction, to enjoy the feeling of control. Michael, unaware of how closely he was being watched, kept walking, aware only of the growing weight of the eyes. He knew that his appearance, tall frame, black hoodie, dog on a leash, was automatically interpreted as a danger signal. He had seen it many times. The way people crossed to the other side of the street. The way drivers locked their doors as he passed. The way security guards looked not at him, but through him, as if he were a ghost from another world. But there was something different tonight. More than just dislike. More than just suspicion. It was like an eclipse when the sun still shines, but there is a chill, like darkness touching your skin. Security cameras were everywhere in Silver Cove, behind trees, under eaves, in streetlights. They covered almost every inch of the property, and from a central observation point, it was possible to watch almost undetected. Michael felt that they were watching him, but he didn't know from where, and that made the situation even more dangerous. At that moment, Jerry and Danny were already out of the car and following him at a distance. They were not walking along the path, but along the bushes, keeping to the shadows, but not hiding completely. On the contrary, they wanted him to notice. A little later, when it would be too late, the headphones connected to the radio were blaring short phrases. Heading south, crossed Section 4 boundary, contact in 30 seconds. But behind those dry words was something that couldn't be said directly. He's not one of us. He shouldn't be, here. He's violating the fact of his own existence. The skin on the back of Michael's neck began to itch, a sign he'd known since childhood. He could tell when people were looking at him with hatred. It wasn't just a sixth sense. It was a survival weapon. He turned his head slowly, and for a moment he saw movement in the bushes. A shadow, a shape, a face. a mocking face, a face that didn't need words. Jerry stepped out first, casually adjusting the belt on which his baton dangled. He was smiling. It wasn't a human smile, but a predatory one, as if he already knew how this was going to end. "Good evening," he said, and it sounded like a threat. Michael stopped. Buster tensed. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Jerry continued, coming closer. He wasn't asking a question. He was making an accusation. Danny moved around to the other side, creating a circle. It was all so routine. It wasn't the first time. It was just the first time in a long time that the victim wasn't the type to run or break down right away. Michael turned slowly toward them, his voice unchanging. "I live here." Jerry chuckled. "Oh yeah? Where exactly?" His voice was like a taut string. "House 84B, with my mother. We can come by and show you." Danny already had his hand on the stun gun. "Is the dog registered?" he asked. Michael nodded. "I have all the papers. If you want, come by and I'll show you." But no one was going to go get the papers. They didn't need the papers. They needed submission, a concession, an apology for his existence. "Listen, man," Jerry began, coming even closer. "You showed up here like you were in charge, but you're not home here, and please show me the papers right away, and no tricks, okay?" Michael felt his insides tighten, not from fear, but from rage, from helplessness, from having to explain his right to breathe over and over again. He tried to step aside, just to move away, but Jerry immediately put out his hand, touching his chest. Danny then approached Buster. Michael turned sharply. "Don't touch him." Danny leaned down. "Dangerous breed. You can't walk him without a muzzle." "He's certified," Michael said reservedly. "This is private property. We decide what is and isn't acceptable," came the reply. Buster growled louder. There was fear in the dog's voice, conveyed by Michael's ragged breathing. They both sensed that this evening might end not in a walk, but in pain. "Maybe you want to be a smartass, huh? We had a robbery here recently, and you know who was there. Another one like that. Nice, polite. And then 2 iPhones and silver." Jerry almost whispered it in his face, trying to make every sound jarring. "You don't know where you are, man. These aren't streets. This is order, and you are the dirt we clean up." He knew what he was saying. He knew how, and he knew Michael would understand. This wasn't just a test. This was an initiation. Proof that he was nobody. The radio crackled again. One of the older men wanted to clarify, but Jerry turned it off. He wanted to finish this without witnesses. He motioned to Danny, who moved slowly toward Buster with the taser. Michael raised his hands. "Don't touch him!" His voice broke. Jerry grinned. "Don't yell at us, kid. We haven't started touching you yet." He took a step forward. Danny swung. It was all happening in silence, under the sunset light, on a perfect path between 2 flower beds, where the sign said, "Welcome to all residents of Silver Cove. Your peace of mind is our concern." Only there was no peace left. All that was left was the hunt. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from, whether you have had something similar in your life, and don't forget to subscribe. And now we continue. Michael hadn't taken 2 steps before Danny yanked Buster's leash so hard that the dog whined and nearly fell off his feet, the thin leather of the wool strap cutting into his neck. And for a moment Michael felt like he was either going to let go or rip it back, but it was too late to do anything about it. "That's it, huh?" Danny said dismissively, tightening the leash until Buster was pulling, and Michael fell forward a little, instinctively catching at the end of the strap. He stood up slowly, his shoulders back, his eyes straight ahead, but a knot of pain and anger twisting in his stomach. Jerry paced around them like a predator, noting Buster's every fighting reflex, as if he were deciding whether to parade his corpse on display later. "Leash too long, kid. The rules are simple. No more than 5 feet, and yours is a replica of a fighting garrote. Leave it at home if you want to stay in one piece." His voice was quiet, but wet with pleasure at being able to humiliate a black teenager in the presence of his own protector. A dog who was now peacefully wagging his tail, defending himself from the cutting neck. "You probably think that safety is the same for everyone, huh?" Jerry continued, stopping to face Michael, his foot stuck out in front of him. a sign of a silent order: stay away. Here's news to you, boy. If you're not in our club, you're an outsider. Understand? Michael wanted to say something, but his throat was dry, and instead of a word, a soft groan escaped Buster, who was painfully waiting for the bullying to stop. Jerry looked into his eyes, looking for fear. Black pupils reflected the setting sun, and they held everything this man needed to be sated: vulnerability that could be broken. Take that belt off him, or I'll cut it off myself. Jerry snorted, slapping his hand on the handle of the folding knife on his belt, either sharpening the blade or simply showing that it was there. Michael thought of his father, a stern intelligence officer who never allowed himself to show weakness. But his father was not there. And now Michael was alone with the men hired to keep Silver Cove clean, to keep our people in order, to make sure strangers did not intrude on their little paradise. He exhaled as hard as he could and calmly reached for his belt, intending to stop the pain, but Jerry stopped him with a look. Don't talk normally first. You do realize that we can call the police and send you to the station to check your identity and permits. We have all the connections in this complex, and you don't want to prove that bullies are a kind of bully, do you? There was no question in his words, but a command, humiliating, but deadly. Buster came over, sniffed Michael's hand, and Michael felt a spark of gratitude from his loyal friend run through his body. He made up his mind. I'll talk any way you want. Just stop torturing him. But Jerry laughed, quietly, but without pity. You'll talk all the time if you know what's best for you. You don't want to seem disrespectful, do you? And he reached for the collar of Michael's sweatshirt to push him back. Michael took a step forward and suddenly jerked to the side, slightly to the left, dodging the blow, like an Olympic boxer dodging a straight jab. Jerry was confused for a split second, and Michael managed to grab his phone. If you don't let go of the leash right now, I'm going to start recording and post it on the internet. His voice trembled, but the words were clear. He felt all eyes on them from the windows above and below where someone might be watching. But instead of worrying, Danny laughed, showing yellow teeth. Send whatever you want, nigger. No one's going to believe you anyway. The kind of lawyers here that'll wear them out after a couple of complaints, and will still say, you were the one who attacked first. The words sounded like a death sentence. He was no longer a man, but an underground criminal who had lost the right to defend himself. Michael felt the smell of sweat and cheap cologne from the guards sharpen in his nostrils, as alien as they were. He looked at Buster. The dog's eyes were blinking, but the pet remained close, ready to protect his master, although he knew he had no chance in a physical confrontation. They were both caught up in this game. Okay, Michael breathed out and tried to calm the situation in a quiet tone. I'll take off the leash and hold the dog by the collar. It'll be short and sweet. Danny wrapped the leash around his hand to make sure Michael didn't try to slip away again. It had a steel grip. That's what you do, little one. Michael leaned over, slid his fingers around the metal ring, released the snap hook, and held the dog firmly by the skin of his neck. Every time Buster moved, his hand shook, and Michael knew that this humiliation was more painful than the blows. He took off the leash. Now Buster stood there, his eyes glued to his master. And with every rustle, the dog's tail thumped the ground, a warning and a plea at the same time. Jerry looked at the boy, raising an eyebrow haughtily. Good, that'll give you more room to breathe. Just don't run away. Michael closed his eyes for a moment to let all the air out through his nose, and when he opened them, he was ready to go on. He walked forward slowly, and the guards pressed him on either side, as if he were in a trap. Yo, man, Jerry said, reaching for his phone. We want to know what's in your pockets. You okay with a search? Michael stopped, his heart pounding. A search. This was so far from a walk that he'd forgotten all about decorum. He remembered his father's lessons. Never let anyone touch you without permission, even if they're in uniform. He clenched his fist to keep from hitting one of them. No. The answer was confident, but inside there was a knot of horror. Jerry's brow furrowed. Naughty, huh? Then I'll call the cops. Jonesy reached for the radio, but Danny intercepted him. Stop. We'll keep him as a trophy. We'll do it our way. From behind the bushes came the sound of fast heels. One of the residents ran out in a dinner dress, her clutch bag glittering in the rays of the setting sun. She screamed, calling Jerry's name, and closed her eyes as she saw Michael standing there, unleashed, wedged between two security guards. "What's going on here?" she blurted out, trying to push away her fear, but her face was pale. Jerry frowned and turned to face her. "This is just a test, Ms. Evans. Everything is under control." She glanced frantically at Michael, who was shaking, about to gather his leash into a fist, and pointed cautiously at him. "Who is he?" Jerry chuckled. "The neighbor, I think. Lives in the house overlooking the pond." The woman frowned, and Michael sensed a mixture of pity and disgust in her gaze. The gaze of a white woman for whom black teenager meant danger. He felt a cold fury, and suddenly realized that nothing would change until they themselves stopped being afraid. He straightened up, throwing back his hood. "I'm Michael Thompson. I live in 84. My dog is Buster." His voice was clear and calm. The woman backed away slightly. He was speaking too loudly. For some, it was an act of protest. For others, it was insolence. Jerry raised his hand in a stop-it gesture, and the guards took a step back. Buster tucked his tail between his legs, but Michael's shoulders remained straight. The woman swallowed and nodded thoughtfully. "I'll check what's on my phone. Maybe one of us has already recorded it." She turned and frantically typed something into her smartphone, as if looking for confirmation that everything that was happening now was not her own imagination. The guards parted, letting Michael go free, but stood there even longer, wondering whether to shoot him with more barbed words. Michael gathered up his leash and, without looking back, continued walking toward the exit of the park area, feeling the gaze of each of them, each of the windows, each guard of someone else's paradise on him. He knew that this was not the end. He knew the worst was yet to come. But his soul was a little lighter. He had shown that he would not break. It was a small victory. Small, but important, and pain would inevitably follow. That was what he was moving on for. Michael, who had barely had time to catch his breath after the humiliating demand to remove the leash, had not had time to take a step when Danny's hand, like a steel vice, grabbed his jacket and jerked him back sharply, causing a freezing pain to shoot up his spine. At the same moment, the second guard, the one who had been giving the commands, stepped forward and punched Michael in the chest with such force that the air escaped from his lungs with a wheeze, and Buster wagged his tail, but could not protect his friend because he was pinned to the ground by the leash in Danny's hand. That first blow sounded like an ultimatum. "You have no claim here." And the sound of the shopper sent a wave of horror across Michael's cheeks, mixed with a sharp flash of anger. He could neither exhale nor comprehend that he was faced with such absolute violence because of the color of his skin. But at the same time, an inner voice told him not to lose heart, not to show weakness, because in his body lived a man raised by a military intelligence officer who valued self-control above all else. Without giving Michael time to recover, Jerry pulled a large, stiff guard belt out of his back pocket and showed it to Michael defiantly, then slapped it hard across his back. A flash of pain ran through the sweat-soaked fabric, and Michael almost fell backwards. But at that very second, Danny's booming laughter tore off the mask of the good-natured overseer. "This is how we greet guests, black guests," he said in a quiet but audible tone for everyone, as if they were actors in an arena of cruelty where Michael was playing the role of a funny animal that needed to be pacified. Jerry carried a pocket flashlight through the windshield of the SUV and illuminated Michael's face so that every wrinkled guard could clearly see the beads of sweat glistening on his forehead and how his pupil, stretched with pain, sought support. But no one offered a hand. "Don't look in the windows," Jerry hissed, slamming a hard punch into Michael's stomach, and Michael ducked to avoid being torn apart by the blow, while Buster, startled, jerked back on the end of his leash, as if to prove that he was prepared to die for his master. There was no spectator in the scene, but everyone heard the dull thuds on cloth and bone, and in the observation room, someone casually looked from the screen to his coffee cup, feeling neither shame nor regret. To them, Michael was an alien, an illegal element, who had to disappear as silently as his dog had to groan under the weight of humiliation. The sound of an ambulance came from somewhere behind them. The neighbor, frightened by the screams, managed to press the panic button, but she was powerless. The guards blocked the path with Jerry's broad figure, squeezing Michael in a vice with their shoulders, and Danny looked mockingly at Buster and pounded out a stream of words. "Come on, little devil. Be thankful we're not maiming your cur. This isn't a riot in the center of town, and your dog is not a tax collector with a mane. And know this, if you show up here again without permission, we'll cut out your heart, and we'll say you tried to attack us." He licked his lips as if he were seeing a steak, and Michael felt ice thicken inside. Not from the cold, but from the absolute malice that was poured over him, as if his body were a vessel for dirt. Suddenly, Jerry pressed his hand to his lips, blocking out any sound from the blazing lantern, as if he wanted to make this moment so intimately cruel that no one would ever believe the story. But Michael wiped the blood from his lip with his hand and said quietly, "You'll surrender if I tell you who my father is." There was a pause. The guards exchanged glances, one with a smirk, the other with a confused question. "Who are you scaring, kid?" Jerry muttered, staring straight into his eyes. "I'm the son of an intelligence colonel. His name is—" Michael didn't have time to finish because Danny pounced on him with another blow to the groin, and the world spun so that he involuntarily let go of the leash. Buster, breaking free, lunged at Michael, growled and leaped at Danny, clawing at the guard's palm, who, not expecting such a rebuff, recoiled and dropped his belt. It was a brief flash, like a thunderstorm in the summer sky when everything freezes and silence returns instantly. Buster stubbornly guarded Michael, his chest heaving with barking and panic, and the second guard, trying to control the situation, grabbed Buster by the scruff of the neck and pressed his muzzle to the asphalt, shouting, "Bitch! Animal! Damn! Dog! Get out of our paradise!" The words sounded so that even those hiding behind the curtains could not remain indifferent. Michael, clenching his fists, was forced to watch Buster being strangled with the belt, and in that moment he felt an unbearable pain that shook his heart. Pain and horror that their world, where decency reigned everywhere, could turn into an effusion of pure hatred for someone who seemed not one of them. But even as his knees buckled, Michael did not cry. He closed his eyes, imagined his father's face, stern and fair, and that image became a shield behind which he hid as another blow landed on his temple, deafening the world and sending him spinning in pools of its own fear. He heard the scraping of metal as someone pulled out the handcuffs, and as they twisted his arms behind his back, Jerry leaned over him and in a quiet voice full of contempt breathed, "We made life easy for you. Less movement, less pain. Remember that, kid." And when they shoved him into the back seat of the car, Buster whined for another minute, but then he quieted down. Because Michael was there, held in the steel embrace of the guards, realizing that this first blow was only the beginning of a long road on which he would have to pay more than once for his right to be a man. As the security car, choking on the ragged roar of the engine, jumped out of the territory of the complex and turned onto an empty country road, a viscous silence hung in the cabin, broken only by Michael's hoarse breathing and the plaintive sighs of Buster languishing in the cargo compartment under a layer of oily blanket. The guards paid no attention to the whining dog, but every glance was directed at Michael, who, handcuffed behind his back, clenched his teeth, trying not to make sounds, realizing that any complaint could turn into a new portion of sadism. They stopped outside an old warehouse, the windows of which were boarded up, the rusty metal bars creaking under their feet. The door without a lock opened easily, as if it had been waiting for them to come. And there, in the semi-dark room, an old, wooden table and 2 metal chairs with peeling paint were already prepared. "Come out, black creature!" hissed Jerry, grabbing Michael by the shoulder and roughly pushing him towards the table. Michael leaned his chest on the cold, laminated surface, the cold of which immediately knocked through his back, and in the corner of the room on the floor lay a torn iron bowl with water and broken bones, in which ants were barely moving, a picture of cruel oblivion, a symbol of how they would treat the creature that used to be called a friend. Danny fished a pair of oven mitts with burn marks from an unknown liquid out of the trunk and, keeping an eye on Michael, said mockingly, "You said yesterday that this was certified. Let's see how it holds up to a bulletproof vest." He pulled a sack off a storage rack and dumped several wooden spiky sticks, metal chains, and an old club with a broken handle on the floor, the tools they used to process recalcitrant people. Michael heard Buster squeal with a low feeling of horror as they were pulled out of the truck and led around in a circle as if testing the strength of the knot. And when they were placed next to Michael, the leash was pulled taut so that all the force was pulling the puppy's neck down and his eyelashes touched the ground. Buster tried to raise his head, but his eyes were lowered as if asking for mercy, and in them was reflected the very fear that could not be hidden. The fear of a prisoner, doomed to torture. Jerry walked up to the dog, picked up one of the spiky sticks, and without thinking hit Buster hard in the side, making him yelp, and the yelp brought Michael out of his stupor, and he tried to move forward, but Danny immediately threw him face down on the table, and Michael felt the bump on his forehead smash against the edge, and the blood mixed with sweat, dripping into the crack between the floorboards. "Don't you dare move," Danny snorted, and Jerry, without taking his eyes off the mauled dog, muttered quietly, "Look, boy, your Buster proved his worth only, well, a few minutes ago. Now we're going to show you how much we value strangers. Look him in the eye, keep looking, and remember the taste of your supper." He hit Buster again and again, on his back, on his sides, on his paws, so that each crack resonated throughout the room, and Michael felt the vibration of pain from each blow, as if he were hitting himself. Every drop of blood that fell from the thin fur to the ground seemed like a small victory for the guards, and Michael couldn't look away. He saw the dog thrashing in agony, his eyes widening and reflecting panic, surprise at the betrayal, at the fact that she had become a target and not a protector. Danny took out the knife and, without thinking, drew the blade across Buster's stomach, making a deep cut. Another cry burst out of the beast, not just a plaintive one, but an animal cry of pain and horror, echoing through the corners of the warehouse. Michael felt his heart breaking with helplessness, with hatred. He craved revenge. He wanted to grab the knife, to rush at them both, but the handcuffs and the force of the guards' indifference made him a lump of despair and anger. When Jerry had finished, he wiped the hem of his shirt on his knees and looked at Michael defiantly. "You should have seen that face before I cut it. It was full of hope. It thought we weren't going to hurt it. Hope for that until we rip your throat out." Then they went to the table, where Jerry spread the papers out, turning over the dog's ID and examination report. It was all a sham, bought with a bribe, but to Michael, it was just the dust they were wiping their feet with, filling formality with violence. Danny walked over to Michael, lifted him by the hood so that all his weight was hanging by a single cord, and forced him to look at Buster, who was writhing in pain on the cold floor. He said slowly and clearly, "Remember, Beast, your dog is no longer going to swim in the pond, run across the lawn, enjoy life. She was here for you, and now she's here for us. You don't want us to treat you like that, do you?" Buster let out his last breath, a weak moan that went straight to Michael's bones, and a fire of rage flared up in his chest. He decided that he couldn't help himself, and he jumped up from his chair, tackled Danny, and tried to grab the knife from him. But Jerry threw him to the floor with ease, kicked him in the temple, and Michael went down, feeling the dark red blood trickling down his face. He heard Danny laugh and Jerry's verdict. "Now you know the value of friends." Then they led him back to the car and threw him in without so much as a glance, as if he no longer existed. Buster had been forgotten in the warehouse. But Michael knew that somewhere that voice, through the dog's groan, was bringing him the last news, that here, in the paradise of Silver Cove, there is no mercy for a black teenager, and their cruelty is not a mistake, but the main weapon that they hold in fear of strangers. When the car started moving, Michael grabbed the window, looked through the worn glass at the warehouse where Buster's warm but already dead soft head lay, and realized that no laws would protect either him or his father, the Colonel, as long as hatred lives in the hearts of these people, which lacks words, but which has enough fists and knives to break not only bodies, but also souls. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from, whether you have experienced anything similar in your life, and don't forget to subscribe. And now we continue. When they were forced back out onto the street by the warehouses, the cold evening air burned Michael's lungs, fettering his chest with heavy lead. But the real cold came not from the wind, but from the words that were now raining down on him. Jerry stopped half a meter away, stretching out his hand, palm forward. as if placing an invisible barrier between himself and the boy, indicating that the space belonged only to his own. A corpse-like gleam of satisfaction danced in the guard's eyes when he said quietly, but so that Danny and Michael could hear clearly, "Listen, kid, you don't belong here, and no one is happy to see you here. You're just a pale imitation of a person who gets in the way of the normal residents of Silver Cove. You understand?» Голос дрогнул от злобы, но был ровным, как нож. Майкл ничего не ответил. Он выучил, что в такие моменты молчания главное оружие, потому что слова слабее удара. Но Джерри, морщась от удовольствия, не собирался останавливаться. «Когда я смотрю на тебя, я вижу проблему, и эта проблема зовется цвет. Ты и все твои черные друзья — просто серые пятна на моем эссенциальном полотне. Я не прошу тебя уйти. Я приказываю. Понял, нигер?» Дэнни подхватил слово, наступая плечом так, что Майкл подпрыгнул на носках. «Улыбнись, паренек. Мне нравится видеть белые зубы на фоне твоей черной морды. Вы, нигеры, будто не понимаете, что ваша часть тела автоматически делает вас преступниками. Сколько ты здесь пробудешь? 1 вечер? Час? 2 минуты!» Danny stood next to him, his sunglasses on, his arms crossed over his chest, and everything around him seemed to have frozen. The rustling of dry leaves, the reflexes of passers-by pushing Michael away with their eyes from their windows, even the distant barking. Everything was silent, listening to this poem of hatred. Buster, barely moving his paws, stood next to him, and Michael saw how the dog pressed his ears back, but did not try to run away. That very look of a loyal victim who would become the last border between man and monster. Jerry smiled as if he had eaten a tasty morsel and touched the belt of Michael's coat to shake his body, expressing undisguised contempt. "You walk around here like you're at home, but you're not even worthy of calling this a place to walk. You're just a bulky black toddler who must disappear. We're not killing you. We're cleaning you. Why can't you understand that borders are drawn in blood, not lines on maps?" He took a step closer, and the sound of the shovel hitting the metal was followed by the trembling rustle of Buster, who barely exhaled, crouched down and showing complete submission. Danny laughed thinly. "Look at that dog. He's your only friend, but even he wouldn't give his life for you. When we're done with him, he'll be nothing more than a piece of meat. And you, kid, will just be a witness to your own death if you don't get out while you have the chance." The words sounded like a death sentence. Michael felt a spark in his head. The memory of Buster's torn-up parts in his last minute, his scream, and the heartless laughter of the guards. He inhaled so deeply that his ribs shook, and exhaled with restraint, gathering together the fragments of his own dignity. "I'll leave," he forced out quietly, but the words sounded louder than their whispers. "I'll leave right now. Just leave him alone." "To leave? Jerry, you suggest that we would be happy to let you go, but we have no entrepreneurs for the blacks. Now you will understand where your place is a muffled melody at once, and the flickering of the lantern which shone through the windows, painted on Michael's face, emphasizing every drop of sweat, every wrinkle of horror. He remembered the lessons of the father, Negro, to cut the air, and a storm was born in it. But when he turned to the broken glass that reflected his dim figure, he realized that even this, "not from here," was not a death sentence. Several minutes of silence passed, until Jerry looked into the car and delivered the final humiliation. "Remember, this world was not made for people like you, and once you're gone, no one will even remember that anyone ever walked here. That's why we're here, to wipe people like you off the face of the earth." And with that, the car disappeared around the corner, leaving Michael alone on a deserted road, where a light breeze ruffled scraps of newspaper and leaves, as if calling on him not to remain in the shadow of someone else's paradise, but to become a force capable of surviving even the most brutal humiliation. Michael was thrown to the very back of the truck with the furious roar of the engine, and when the doors slammed shut, there was an oppressive silence in the cabin, broken only by the dull thump of his heart, not his, but the car's. He closed his eyes, concentrating on his own sensations, the pain squeezing his chest, the blood burning in his throat, and his hands cuffed so that his fingers were numb, but words could not escape. In those minutes, he realized that silence was his only weapon, because his screams would only sound like moans of humiliation, and his whispers would sound like self-pity. When an old hangar with peeling gates pulled up to the truck, The same two guards indifferently unloaded Michael onto the dew-wet asphalt, and to the left, in the semi-darkness, stood his brother in misfortune. Buster, tied up and skinny, but alive. At that moment, Michael again remembered his father's lessons. Zero contact is your best defense. Silence turns an enemy into a gate, open only to one's own rage. But now he could do nothing but stand there, saying nothing, as Jerry led him to the iron door, spat on his palm, and swiped his face so that a tear of blood ran down his cheek. "Are you going to keep quiet like that?" he sneered, holding a phalanx-type pistol to his temple, not aimed precisely, but rather demonstratively. Michael stood motionless, and this made the guard even more angry. He pulled out the ramrod from the shotgun and hit the teenager's back with it, so that the body would know where it belonged. Buster howled, but Michael did not turn around. He could not watch his best friend suffer again, because the words, "I'm sorry," and "I don't know what to do," and "hang in there," could be read in his eyes, and these words could betray his weakness. In the room of the hangar, the weak flashlights flowed through the cracks, exposing the rough concrete wall, written by the inscriptions unrealistically "without black," and "place freely from dirt." Leaving Michael at the doorway, closed his eyes from pleasure and exhaled. The silence is a room where you, the best, equal. Danny sat at the center of the papers with some protocols and clapped his palm on them so that they scattered on the floor, and then stepped to Michael closely. Check the pulse. Shia after a broken window. "Your blood flows more slowly than ours," Danny sneered, leaning in so close that Michael could smell his breath, the smell of tobacco smoke and cheap cologne and ruthlessness. He wanted to say something, to deflect the racist's attack, but he remembered. Silence was a stronger cry for justice than words. Danny straightened up and walked over to the concrete wall to pull Michael face down. Michael touched his palms to the damp floor and blinked, trying to see what was happening. He couldn't see the guard's face, but he felt a hand tighten around his neck and a knee press his belly into the floor, making it hard to breathe. His ears began to pound, and the urge to scream synchronized with the pounding, but his throat refused to sing. Danny said dully, "Listen, the birds don't sing, the water doesn't flow, and you're still rotting." Then he said over his shoulder to Jerry, "The guy prefers to remain silent. What to do?" And they both burst into laughter, so loud and mocking that the plaster in the hangar walls shook. Knowing neither mercy nor pity, they dragged an old manhole cover to the door, lifted it between the two of them, and turned it around, revealing sharp metal teeth on the inside. "We watched you stay silent while your dog was being beaten. Maybe you should say thank you for letting him live," Jerry said quietly, as if offering him a choice. Suffer himself, or take revenge on Buster. Michael only clenched his jaw in response, allowing pain, fear, and despair to mix into a single cold stream inside him. He said nothing, because words would betray his spirit. Instead, his eyes lit up with such a fire that the guards involuntarily recoiled. They understood. Silence can be louder than any foul language. At that very moment, there was a shrill screech as the security car pulled up to the hangar, its headlight breaking the edge of the night, and the silhouette of a female guard flashed in the cabin window, aiming a mobile camera at the entrance. "Someone's filming," Danny growled, rushing towards the exit. But Michael took advantage of their confusion. He jumped back sharply, twisting his handcuffed arm, and kicked the guard who had grabbed the hatch in the side with his hoof, causing him to drop the lid on the floor. 100 paces from the hangar, the car stopped, but the doors did not open. The woman behind the wheel was in no hurry to intervene. Danny fiddled with the hatch, and Jerry tried to remember how to use the radio. Michael rose to his knees, breathing deeply, feeling his thoughts take shape again. He was not an unarmed boy. He was the son of an intelligence officer, and silence was perhaps the first stage of his counterattack. He finally heard his own voice in his head. "No need to shout. You need to act." But in the darkness of the hangar, lit only by the flashes of headlights, it was still too dangerous. He did not have time to move away and stumbled over a bag of some garbage, and the guard rushed at him again. Michael fell on his back but managed to put his foot out and knock the attacker down. Their short fight ended with him face down, and both hands were pinned behind him under the weight of Danny's body. Then a female guard jumped out of the car, A whistle flashed in her hands. A siren screamed so loudly that even the concrete shook. The guards tore Michael off themselves into the hellish bustle, and he found himself sandwiched between them again. Words fell. "You won't be able to hide. We will find you. You will be silent in the cell longer than you want." He didn't say anything, but as they pulled him back into the truck, he could hear a cop yell, "Stop playing around! Support his head, he's losing consciousness!" And it was the first time anyone had spoken without hatred, just stating a fact. The man in the seat was barely conscious and needed help. As the doors slammed shut, Michael felt the world shake, dissolving into darkness and sirens. He lay there, his hands still cuffed, but in his head there was one word: silence. He realized that silence was the key to survival, and that meant winning. And even if the guards continued to torture him with words and blows, their power over him would only last as long as he allowed them to. And tomorrow, when this video became evidence, when his silence would speak louder than any scream, he would finally be able to speak. "I will hear you, world," he thought, closing his eyes. "And you will hear me. And then we will see where the voice really is." Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from, whether you have had anything similar in your life, and don't forget to subscribe. And now we continue. The car crashed to the side of the road, the yard gates swung open almost silently, and as the guards, still drunk with their own cruelty, pushed Michael into the dark back of the truck, where the remnants of Buster's blood still glistened on the rough plywood, he heard the approach of sirens and the whistle of more security. A few seconds later, 2 police officers appeared under the curtains in the narrow windows of the truck, a short lieutenant with a square jaw and a short, stingy gaze, and next to her, a middle-aged female detective with tired eyes that immediately caught the scent of fear and guilt. The guards froze for a moment, looked at each other, and pretended that Michael had arbitrarily intruded on their official vehicle, like a rebellious teenager starting a fight. "What do we have here?" the lieutenant asked in a smoky voice, and before anyone could testify, pointed at the man in uniform. "You, dude, explain the situation. Can you speak clearly and without emotion, or I will make you regret your jokes?" Jerry chuckled and took a step towards the female detective. "We detained a young offender who was walking around the security area without permission and started a fight with our service dog. He was behaving aggressively, threatening the staff, and insulting them with racial slurs." At this, the detective frowned, almost raising an eyebrow, but the lieutenant, adjusting his tie, nodded. "I see. Did you take pictures of the injuries?" The guard held out his smartphone, but its screens were already erased with inscriptions and logos. Jerry explained, "We recorded it. A photo of Buster and my blue eye, where he bit me. He's trying to accuse us of assault." The detective silently opened her notebook, and the lieutenant walked over to Michael, who was hunched over, as if trying to fit into the corner of the trunk. He slapped his palm against the frame of the truck, the sign for "Get Out." Michael realized he had no choice and straightened up, releasing the handcuffs with a click, as if freeing himself from the shackles of humiliation. He sat on the edge, kneeling over his stomach, and quietly examined the dust on the cop's skin. The detective wife narrowed her eyes. "The guy looks bad. Was he beaten?" The lieutenant shrugged. "He tried to attack our officers, biting, threatening, and cursing. Every now and then, black kids in these complexes riot, revenge on the oppressed. Actually, we barely managed to subdue him. He said his dog was a Secret Service dog. A pest, he said, from intelligence. Lies." Michael gritted his teeth. The guards knew the true value of his kinship, but they used this knowledge in a negative way. He did not want to mention his father because he was afraid for his mother, but the silence turned against him. The female detective looked at his face. A bruise on his temple, a cut above his eyebrow, a pale cut lip. It could not all be the result of self-defense. "Lieutenant, about riots and revenge. It sounds strange. I need to see the reports of the fight." "Sure, detective," he nodded. "We'll call an ambulance, make sure the victims wet their wounds, and everything will be recorded." He took out a notebook and drew a diagram on which he wrote down threats, addressed to the guards, biting a dog, and using bodily harm as evidence. "We call it self-defense," Jerry said proudly, as if this were the final touch to the picture of his heroism. Michael wanted to scream and show the lieutenant the video from the storage cams on the guard's work tablet, but he knew that no one would see it until this performance was over. The female detective paused, folded her pen, and looked at the lieutenant. "I want to interview him separately from the guards. He says he was beaten for no reason." The lieutenant snorted but nodded. "Okay, but the police are in a hurry. We have an emergency check at the other end of the district." The woman turned to Michael and handed him a piece of paper. "Tell me what you remember." Michael slowly took the pen, his hand shaking, but there was something determined in his eyes. He began to write. The guards stepped back, covered their mouths, and retreated into the shadows to observe the market value of this witness. When he finished, the female detective gathered up the papers and then read them all out loud, pointing out the contradictions in their testimony. "You say he attacked first, and here he is writing about beating the dog, making racist comments, a mangled shoulder, and a broken rib that is not in your reports." The lieutenant clenched his teeth, and Jerry paled slightly but tried to smile. "The reports show minor injuries, and all video of tight areas has been suppressed for security reasons." The detective shrugged. "This is grounds for an internal investigation. At this point, I see no grounds to arrest this teenager." She turned to the lieutenant. "Write down his statement, and for now, let him go." At that moment, the guards realized that their cover was pressuring them from above. The same police officers who had previously allowed violations to be overlooked for the sake of the residents' peace of mind were now letting them know that they had better stop playing gods. The hangar windows in the distance flared with the faint flicker of cameras, recording at full volume. For the second time that evening, Michael felt relief. The silence did indeed sound, but only words on paper could give him a chance. He straightened up, pushing his hair back from his sweaty forehead, and muttered, "Thanks." The detective nodded, and the lieutenant muttered, "If you need anything else, you know where to find us." They drove away, leaving Michael in the middle of a deserted yard surrounded by old gates and concrete slabs that shook dust and cigarette ash in the wind. He sat down on the curb, his body turning into a light lump. The memory of every blow, every word of racial scorn, every draft of hatred pulsated through his veins. He did not rise immediately, because he knew that sooner or later the guards would return to the streets of Silver Cove, wanting to finish what they started. But today he was given a break from their cover-up and racism. He looked up at the sky, where the first stars were already shining, and thought of his father, somewhere far away, preparing a report, unaware of how bitter the last chapter of his family diary would be. And in that moment he knew the real battle was just beginning, a battle for truth, for memories, for honor, and for no one to call him stranger anymore. When the police finally drove away, leaving Michael in the vacant lot behind Silver Cove, he rose to his feet and stretched, feeling a strange lightness that he knew was an illusion. Soon the cove would pull him back in, like a spider in a web. He braced himself, clenched his fists, wiped his cut lip, and set out to find a way out of the vacant lot. The sounds of cars on the driveway had died away, but his head echoed with the names that now shook this dead corner. Michael Thompson, a name that was not just a password for the police, but a reflection of his father's espionage operations. A name that could cause panic in those who believed that their paradise had no place for strangers. He walked slowly along the broken gravel path, where his every movement cast a shadow on the concrete slabs along the fence, and in his ears there still echoed, "Racism is not an issue of skin color, it is an issue of conscience." Words he had once heard from his father, but which now sounded almost impossible. At the same hour, the administration of Silver Cove had already received a call from the local headquarters, where the lists of residents and staff were kept. One of the directors of the complex, Mr. Willard, in a crisp white shirt with a tie clip and a smudged moonhook logo on his lapel, stood at the window of his second-floor office and held the receiver. His voice, controlled and authoritative, sounded like a thunderclap. Yes, I know how this may look, but we need to act coolly. This is a matter of hundreds of calls from concerned residents. We can't have the name Thompson in the news." He said the name Thompson so quietly as if he were casting a spell that would punish anyone who didn't understand. People were already whispering in the corridors. Thompson, is he the son of that spy? Each whisper cast a shadow on the immaculate facade of the complex. Each whisper conjured up images of official reports, secret missions, and possible scandal. The name had become dirt, a reflection of danger and menace. Michael walked on, feeling the annoying lights of the complex flickering in the distance, like the eyes of a monster ready to swallow him. He remembered how, as a child, his father would take his hand and repeat, "There's a story behind every name, son. No one can know ours, but one day, a name may become your armor." Now he wanted to believe in that armor, but it was too thin. He approached the concrete blocks, beyond which a narrow country road began towards the main entrance. There, under the streetlights, life was glimmering. Cars, guards, another shift of patrol. He looked back. The wasteland was so close, but already seemed like an icy mouth that blocked his way back. Names, he thought. They are the ones that make people keep their distance and inspire more fear than any baton or taser. Suddenly, a jeep appeared on the road. The headlights illuminated his face, and he froze. Guards? An ambulance? But instead of the expected car, a real armored police car pulled up. Blue lights were burning on its bumper. A muffled wail of a siren was heard from the roof. As soon as the armored car stopped, the door swung open, and out stepped a uniformed officer with 3 stars on his shoulders. Captain Brooks, a man in his 40s but with eyes that could bore through metal. He swung his arm, walked up to Michael, and without asking permission, grabbed him by the collar of his jacket, pulled him toward him, and suddenly shoved his chest into his. "Honey, are you Thompson?" His voice was both angry and surprised. "This is no place for coronavirus babies," he muttered, stroking his chin. Michael felt every muscle tense and held back a scream. "This name is my life," he repeated to himself. Brooks pulled an ID card out of his pocket and shoved it in front of Michael's face, forcing him to look at the metal. "Daddy says we need to cover for you, but we're not here to cover for dirt." Michael swallowed hard, but said nothing. He chose silence because every word could become another accusation. "You're a silent person, but I'll shout you down the block." Officer Brooks documented the inexorable sound of the Thompson name as a pretext for an investigation. It was power hidden behind the cover of a name. Hatred that now spread through offices, through hallways, through office phones. The most influential residents of Silver Cove wrote complaints where they shouted in impeccable handwriting, "We demand that people named Thompson be removed from our area of peace. A threat to national security in an apartment complex is unacceptable." Their voices sounded like hammer blows. Their hatred instilled fear, even in those who had never met Michael. Suddenly, the red lights of a smoking helicopter flared in the sky, and the armored car released Michael, only to have him stumble but not fall, and Captain Brooks said quietly, "Family ties won't save you here." Then he turned to the crew, and in that moment, Michael realized that the name Thompson was already rolling around the offices like a hot coal that wouldn't be extinguished. "All units, watch for Thompson. He won't be here long," came the voice over the radio, and the armored car rattled over the potholes and drove away, leaving Michael among the lampposts and shadows, filled with the whispers of racists. Standing on the pavement, ice-cold sweat trickling down his back, Michael thought, a name that frightens isn't always the name of the enemy. Sometimes it's a name meant to inspire. He clenched his fists, tensed his body, and without looking back at the looming shadows, stepped forward to the main entrance of Silver Cove, where under the lights of the cameras above the gates, a sign with the slogan, "We protect your peace," flickered, and this slogan now sounded to him like a lawsuit in a court of law against racism. Despite the threats, taunts, and panicked whispers of names, he was going to walk through these gates, because his name was not a sentence, but a weapon ready to expose the lie and reveal the truth to the whole world. Let's take a short break. Write in the comments where you listen to our stories from, whether you have had anything similar in your life, and don't forget to subscribe. And now we continue. When Michael, step by step overcoming the resistance of his own fear and physical fatigue, finally found himself in front of the gates of Silver Cove, where the sign, "We protect your peace," now sounded like a mockery to him. He already understood. that the superficial insults and mundane mockery of the guards were only the outer shell of something much more dangerous and skillful. Even earlier, listening in the distance to the detective's investigation and the distribution of orders on the radio, he caught in the voices of the police officers a thin tremor of anxiety, which the guards passed off as confidence in the absolute support of the authorities. But now, passing through the gate, he noticed that the surveillance cameras were not just watching the territory, they were set to an enhanced mode and monotonously scanned everyone entering, checking against the list of people who were not welcome here. Along the path to the central pond, he passed several groups of residents in their branded vests, nodding to the guards as if greeting the prey. And with each such nod, a new fire of indignation flared up in his chest. He saw their eyes, cold, calculating, with a greedy thirst for punishment, as if each of these residents had been taught that the colour of his skin was a ticket to the category of never one of us. They never suspected that this evening was not just a continuation of the hunt, but the beginning of the exposure of a network where the racism and arbitrariness of their law enforcement were only the tip of the iceberg of corruption. Here, at Silver Cove, the directors of the complex, judging by the secret documents that once flashed across Mr. Willard's desk, covered up not only robberies on private property and falsification of protocols, but also a large-scale money laundering that linked the HOA with shady contractors and influential figures in the city administration. The names that until recently had inspired awe or hatred in the residents, Crawford, Lawson, Willard, Brooks, no longer seemed isolated, acting out of personal animosity. They were part of a single mechanism in which racism served as a cover for the real stakes, gaining control of expensive real estate, squeezing out the unnecessary, the outsiders, and turning the safety of the crafty paradise into a cruel extremist experiment. As he paused at the edge of the pond where Buster had just been taken for response certification and evidence against himself, he saw the sign of the security post reflected in the water, and the reflection was broken, as if the pond were hinting that reality was blurred here, and that what was called law and order was only a cunning show counting on the self-righteous pity of the general public and the tacit consent of the authorities. Stepping closer, he heard the guards' quiet voices in the distance, discussing details. If they haven't arrested him personally, then someone is involved. We need to make an urgent agreement with the authorities so that the case gets lost. And these words sounded not like rumors, but like a sentence, because behind these whispers were hidden the doors of closed offices, where they decided who would be given carte blanche to beat up and who to protect. Suddenly Brooks came out of the shadows, his face stern, but there was confusion in his eyes. "Have you been to the station? Have you been interrogated?" he asked. But Michael, looking at him, realized that the captain was not looking for facts, but for an order from above. "I want to be sure that no one falsifies the materials," Brooks said quietly, as if expecting Michael to tell him a secret that he never wanted to make public. And it was at that moment that the truth crystallized. The police, once called upon to protect against violence, were themselves embroiled in a conspiracy in which racism was presented as a smokescreen, and predators in uniform regarded the skin color of the target as a sign of the legitimate use of force. Michael accepted this challenge silently, his silence a fact that could reveal the situation more than any accusations. He simply pointed a finger in the direction of Willard's office and said, "I know who you are, and I know who you pay these guards with." His voice was quiet, but there was enough steely determination in it to chill the blood in his veins. Brooks looked around furiously. "You're going too deep," but did not have time to finish because several neighbors, residents of Silver Cove, emerged from the bushes, holding smartphones and tablets with social media broadcasts already running. "He says we have cover from above," echoed throughout the gallery of the residential complex. And suddenly, commands were heard from the gates. Close access to the internet on the premises. Ban residents from going online. It was the panic of those in power when their game was exposed. At that moment, the internal security of the complex, which had previously impeccably observed the bans and quotas for outsiders, failed. The network urgently blocked cameras, jammed signals, threatening to shut off Wi-Fi for all subscribers, just to prevent Michael from posting evidence. But people were already running to the gates, watching him through the screens. The fear of the outsider was replaced by curiosity and support. And in this chaos, when turquoise lights of the patrol police hung over the crowd of Silver Cove residents, and the roar of a news helicopter rose in the distance, Michael finally felt that he was not alone. His silence turned into a word, the word into a testimony, and the testimony into the beginning of the end for those who thought that their racist game had no barriers. And as he strode toward the gates, honking and emergency vehicles whistling, he was no longer the powerless teenager who had been beaten for the color of his skin. He was a symbol of the depths of corruption that lie behind every absurd act of cruelty, and that names, when spoken loudly and the truth revealed, can outshine any sign that says, "We protect your peace." Michael stopped at the glittering glass of the Silver Cove Central building, where the shadows of the police and the evening lights of the news cameras swirled on the marble steps in the fog of headlights, and his heart pounded loudly in his chest. Before, he had walked here feeling like an outsider, but now he walked as a master of change, because hundreds of eyes were behind him, thirsting for the truth. It seemed that only a minute ago, he was that silent boy who was thrown into the basement of the warehouse, cut off from the dog, humiliated to the level of tissue and bones. But now he felt a surge of strength, as if the very memory of being the son of a colonel in military intelligence came to him, and this knowledge gave him confidence. The policemen and guards shied away in fear when he raised his hand and with one gesture stopped the sirens and horns of the patrols that buzzed around them like a swarm of irritated hornets. But his voice came out quiet, almost a whisper. "Enough, no further. Not the words of my name, not a drop of the innocent blood. Because of the color of the skin, you heard the words, vile Niger, black creature, nonsense, bastard." And in that cry of justice, sparks of retribution flared in Michael's eyes. He stepped forward, looked up at the shiny bank logos, at the glossy signs of the lawn dwellers, and said louder, "Here and now, Silver Cove must admit its guilt. Your paradise has become an arena for atrocities. You have made me and thousands like me targets." His words penetrated the roar of the cars, passed through the impartial lenses of the cameras, and echoed in the hearts of those who had long ago lost the right to vote. Suddenly, the glass of the front entrance shattered. One of the inhabitants threw a stone, shouting, "Where is justice? Where is the law?" This action destabilized the remnants of order. The guards recoiled, their hooves hit the stone, and Lieutenant Brooks barely restrained himself from drawing his pistol. And at that moment, when the whirlwind of fear and rage reached its climax, Michael felt the silence compressed inside him turn into loud cries. "Enough!" That was the name his neighbors had called his dead dog, remembering the terrifying squeal that had torn apart the silence of the warehouse. Their cry was both a cry and a demand from karma. And above this general cry of support from a mother, clouds of police helicopters descended, blocking the road, demanding that the riots stop. But Michael did not retreat. He stopped at the threshold of the building, walked through the broken door, and climbed the stairs, where the mailboxes still contained bills for security, bags of coffee, and brochures about silent luxury. He kicked in the door of the best office, Willard's office, where cigarette ash and sticky coffee stains from late-night meetings with city bosses still burned on the table. And it was there, in the dim light, that he saw the report flickering on his laptop screen about the Silver Cove cleanup, where racism and abuse of power were combined into one package. Willard stood by the window, his expression horrified, unfazed by his immaculate shirt and family ring. "You will all be held accountable," Michael said quietly, but the walls shook. And when he named the people giving the orders, Lawson, Crawford, Brooks, they sounded like blades cutting through a web of lies. News crews, police officers, civil rights lawyers, and witnesses filed into the office, CCTV footage hidden in phone pockets. Details of the dog whipping and the teenagers' beating posted online, scattered across the feeds like merciless punishment. And as the security guards smashed tables and tried to grab Michael, he was surrounded by people. Police officers received orders from the command center to stop the violence, and Willard was handed a subpoena demanding that he appear for questioning. Soon, shouts of "Justice for all! No impunity! In memory of Buster!" rang out from the floodlit courtyard. These were not just slogans, they were the revival of the conscience of Silver Cove. And at that moment, Michael dropped to one knee, as if paying tribute to the memory of a friend lying in a cold plywood coffin. But he felt that he had collected not only his own pain, but also everyone who suffered in silence. "Brooks, you thought you were shielding me from my father's reputation," he said to the police captain who was standing next to him, and now could not get away with it. "But you ended up on the side of violence and racism, and I am on the side of justice." And when the first tears rolled down the residents' cheeks, remembering Buster, and Michael's body and soul trembled with unleashed rage and relief, everyone saw that Silver Cove had collapsed, not from an external assault, but from within, from the injustice and cruelty that had no place in the heart of the city. Arrests followed. The guards who gave the order for the beatings were taken into custody. The complex's director resigned and stood trial, and dozens of residents filed a class action lawsuit for moral damages. The world began to speak of a small teenager with great truth, and the name Michael Thompson forever became a symbol of the fact that the darkness of racism can be driven out by the light of unity and justice. And although he lost a friend and was doused with humiliation, in this last moment the story took on a new meaning. Retribution came not from the fury of broken destinies, but from the determination not to remain silent when the wind of change blows. Outside the window, and every voice has the weight capable of destroying the walls of lies and building a new world. Write in the comments what you think about this story and whether you have experienced racism in your life. You are very important to us, and we appreciate each of you. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like this video. Wish yourself a good day, and in the comments write the phrase, "I listened to the end," so that we know that you were with us until the very end.